Hello and welcome to the retrospective review of the fifth game in the Final Fantasy series as we ask the question, should you play Final Fantasy V? When it comes to role-playing games, particularly Japanese role-playing games, there are two topics of contention that split the audience down the middle, that really make players either turn towards or away from the genre, that are sticking points. One of them is whether or not the game is turn-based. A lot of people like myself really see the joy and the benefit of a turn-based system, where you have time, whether it's a limited amount of time, but definitely time to choose your actions and make your decisions, selecting your options from a menu. Other people, that's a deal breaker. They prefer their games to be active, action-orientated experiences. The second sticking plaster, even for the people who have accepted the desire for turn-based gameplay, is how much grinding the experience is going to require. Well, I've mentioned the word grinding a few times in these retrospectives. It's when your characters are not leveled up sufficiently for you to be able to overcome a skill check of a certain boss or encounter or point in the game that you just can't pass. So you have to circle an area repeating the same drudgery, the same battles, the same tasks, whatever activity is required for you to gain new skills or level up your abilities, increase your health points, increase the strength for which you will damage enemies, in order for your characters to be capable of overcoming the skill check that has been holding you back. That experience adopted many years ago the term grinding, because it can just grind you down as a player. There are games out there that just absolutely require you to turn your brain off and settle into the knowledge that you're just going to have to circle the drain for a certain amount of period. You want to pass through the game? Well, you better put the work in. But games are meant to be fun, they're meant to be an enjoyable experience. This is meant to be an activity that we can all share. Video games are the only format of entertainment that actively gatekeeps its content from the community trying to access it. Video games are the only genre that actively says, if you can't handle it, you cannot continue forwards. And role-playing games are amongst the worst of this stereotype. I'm giving this little rant and diatribe because I think of every single Final Fantasy game in existence, ignoring potentially the online massive multiplayer online games. Final Fantasy V requires the most grinding of every game in the series. I mentioned it in Final Fantasy II. It's not that Final Fantasy II requires an inordinately unfair amount of grinding. It is that the way that you have to conduct the grinding is particularly egregious. Final Fantasy V, grinding is not egregious. In fact, quite often it's quite fun. If you're capable of just turning your brain off and saying, right, I'm just going to hack at monsters, take the treasure, level up, and I'm just going to do that for a little while. I'm going to take 20 minutes out to do it. It's a brilliant experience. But I think for players who don't like that, well, the good news is the Pixel Remaster Modern Re-Release allows you to increase the amount of experience, increase the amount of AP points that you can get from each combat, so you can reduce the amount of grinding. But I haven't done that. I've tried to live to what the closest the Pixel Remaster will offer to the authentic original experience. And that means Final Fantasy V is going to make you work. Now, fortunately, what you're working for is a really good game. Final Fantasy V is, I think, the last of the truly classic original Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy 1 and 2 and 3, the trilogy on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the 8-bit games, set a template that 4 revamped and then 5 adhered to. You are walking a set of characters through an overworld map. You're on a quest to find and protect the crystals, which are under attack from a malevolent evil force. There is fun storytelling, but lots of fetch quests along the way where you will meet interesting characters who will either assist you or prevent you from making your way to the crystals and doing what you ultimately need to do. So there's a lot of sidetracking, a lot of missions to places that have nothing to do with the main quest, but are there to widen your search parameters, give you access to parts of the map that you're not capable of reaching on your own. As you cross through that map, you will have random battles where whatever monsters or local fauna in the vicinity of the area you're in will fight you. And like Final Fantasy III before it, this game is dominated by the job system. Now, for people who like the job system, and I really like the job system in Final Fantasy III, a lot of the diehards will say that Final Fantasy V is the ultimate representation of the job system in classic Final Fantasy games. It's never been done better than this, and I understand where they're coming from. There are 22 jobs. It's a marvellous variety of different abilities, different play styles that you can equip across your characters. The game is nothing if not flexible. The team who developed it, tested it, you can power through, you can bulk your characters up, you can give them the most hit points, the most damage output, you can just brute force your way through the game if you're prepared to put in the grinding. But to try and alleviate that, you can change your jobs. You can have magical jobs, you can have combat jobs, you can have range jobs where you can position your characters in the back row and fire at them. You can have summoners, you can have ninjas, you can have monks. It's a wonderful array of varieties, and for people who like to experiment with different team combinations, this is really, really good. But you do get to a certain point in the game where you realise that to proceed through the next area, what you want, what you need, is a specific job ability. And the 4 characters don't share the jobs. If you level one character as one job, they will gain abilities in that job class. The knight, for example, can learn to cover or defend characters around him. Now this is good because it means if you have a character who's quite weak, who will take damage easily, you can use the knight to protect that cover and try and alleviate some of the damage of the other character. If you level up and master the knight class, you can learn that ability, master it, and then you can use that ability as any other job. So you might realise, right, what I want is for my characters to have this specific ability, which I can learn by mastering it, by being this job for a while. And that encourages you to change job to learn the ability. If you want all 4 characters to learn that cover move, all 4 characters need to know it. And there were some times when I was really annoyed playing through this game because I knew the ability that I wanted my 4 characters to have, but 2 of the abilities were known by one character and not by any of the other 3. You can only have 2 abilities equipped and you can't change your equipment in mid-battle, which means you have to put in the work, you have to grind, you have to unlock all of the abilities and all of the characters that you want to have the capability of mixing and matching. And you can only have 2 abilities equipped at a time. This requires constant tactical thought about how you're going to progress through the game, because a lot of the bosses in this game, even more than Final Fantasy IV, were puzzles in so much of they required timing. They had windows of opportunity where you could attack or you couldn't attack or you had to use a certain spell type. Final Fantasy V takes this concept of puzzle-based boss design to the next extreme. There's iteration after iteration of bosses that are only weak to one specific thing, or only vulnerable if you approach them a certain way. You can, as I said, throw that to the winds, grind and grind and grind and brute force your way through anything. Almost any character job combination is feasible, but there's a world of difference between feasible and accessible. And Final Fantasy V is a really fun experience, but this game made me work for it more than any other game in the franchise. And I don't begrudge that. I had a good time. I enjoyed playing through it. But I've never been more conscious, with the exception of Final Fantasy VIII. 3 more videos to go before we touch that beautiful little topic. With the exception of Final Fantasy VIII, I've never been more conscious of the process of grinding than I was in this game. And that's a shame, because I think Final Fantasy V has a ton to offer the world. As I said, it refines the concept of the storyline, the experience from Final Fantasy 1 and 3, and it fleshes out with the theme of adventure. The world of Final Fantasy V still plays upon the traditional Dungeons & Dragons semi-medieval, but with a slight steampunk hint of lost ancient technology flair, which the series has been playing on since the original. The worlds are a little bit sparser in terms of the civilizations, but the kingdoms here and the detail it does present are quite magnificent. The storyline is largely a procession of finding new ancient ruins and uncovering new ancient technology, all of which is revealed to you with a piece of spectacle as giant skybound monoliths, sky fortresses, ancient beings and cosmic entities rise before you. It honestly looks fantastic. Having had one game to practice what the power of the 16 megabyte game cartridges of the early 1990s, Squaresoft were able to really go to town and animate this game far more fluently and vividly than any of the games that came before. For a game of its era, it's a beautiful looking game and it has sufficient moment of spectacle to really impress the player. It's just fun. Its storyline has some dark moments. The main villain is a intimidatingly bold and overpowered character called Exter. His musical theme alone just gives you this villainous vibes. It takes that Saturday morning cartoon from Final Fantasy IV and amps it up to the next level. It just wants you to be pulled into the experience and go along. The main character is a guy called Bart. Unlike Cecil, who was wrapped with guilt in the previous game, Bart is a free-loving, free-spirited adventure. He does have a personal connection to the storyline, but it's only there if you want to go and explore certain parts of the story. Far more interesting are the twin sister characters of Lena and Faris. One of them believing she was the sole heir to a kingdom, the other being her long-lost hidden sister who was swept away to sea and was raised by pirates, pretending to be a man her entire life, and actually finds that she doesn't want to go back. She'd prefer to be considered a man. She'd prefer to continue in the life that she built with her own hands. And given this was written in the early 1990s, in a genre that was still learning to tell deep and complex storytelling, Final Fantasy V does not get anywhere deep or emotionally involved as the later games in the series, but it has these lovely little touches. It also has a lot of pushing for comedy value, and it strides into topics with little regard to the consequences, constantly moving on to the next thing. But the variety here, I really appreciated. The characters are just engaging and pull you through. The game gives you 4 characters to control at a time, which is much more stable than the rotating up to 5 in the previous game. There is some rotation in this game, not everyone's available the whole way through, but it's far more stable than the previous entry. It wants you to focus on the job system and the capabilities of your multiple characters more than the personality of the characters themselves. It does do a wonderful job of changing the environment. It's not quite as crazy as Final Fantasy IV. There's much more thematic streamlining of the events, but there's still a lot of interesting stuff going here. There's an area where you have to escape from a burning castle within a time limit, which is a first for the franchise. You have to explore a possessed library where the books have been possessed by demons coming to life and literally emerging from the pages, and you travel from one world to another, and there's a really clever and innovative trick when you compare the maps between the two worlds that hints at where the storyline is ultimately going. So I had a great time with Final Fantasy V, and I've got a lot to recommend it for anyone who enjoys the tactical party building aspect of late 80s and early 90s turn-based RPGs. But if you've got no time for grinding, turn on the multipliers for the experience points in the modern remakes, or consider other games in the Final Fantasy franchise, because this is, I don't want to say it's one of the more forgettable entries, but it's definitely one of the more overlooked ones. This being the last game in the series that never came to European or American shores. From this point on, every Final Fantasy game had, if not an immediate day one worldwide release, it did eventually reach global markets, and it was only upwards from here.